I've been working on installing new granite countertops in this kitchen for a couple of days now, and I've got all of the pieces cut and installed on the tops of the cabinets, except for this piece over here. It's just sitting here temporarily, and it still needs to be glued down to the top of the cabinet. But before I set this countertop on permanently, I need to finish this edge that I cut right here. I need to make it at least somewhat similar to this edge right here, which is finished. At the factory, they glue a piece of granite underneath here and then polish it all the same so it looks like a nice, smooth, finished piece of granite. So what I'm going to do is sand this down with some sandpaper. It'll probably take a lot, but I'll sand this down so that it's smooth, and then I'll cut a piece of granite and glue it on underneath here. I've taken this piece back outside so that I can shape this edge. If you look on the edge here that's already finished, it's just a very small circumference rounded edge right here and polished. So what I'll do to try to imitate that on this side is just use the grinder and take off a little bit of material right here to round it off a little bit, and then start sanding it with my orbital sander. I'll probably use an awful lot of sandpaper, but I think it will work. So you can see the grinder will give me the kind of rough outline of the corner that I need to make, and I'll just smooth it out with the sander. It's probably also a good idea to tape this polished surface. That way, if I accidentally touch it with the sander, I won't make more work for myself. In addition to making this corner right here, I also need to completely sand out all of the marks here that the saw made when it was cutting this edge. It's taken me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pieces of sandpaper so far, but I've been able to remove the marks from the saw from about that much of this edge. So I might have to get more sandpaper, but that's okay. Sandpaper's cheap. So I'll just keep sanding down the line here and get all of these saw blade marks out. I used up 18 of the 20 pieces of sandpaper in this package, but the result is a smooth edge, and I've eliminated all of those marks that the saw blade made when I cut this piece. So the next thing I'm going to do is use a finer grit sandpaper than this 80 grit. I'm going up to a 120 grit, and I'll make a few passes with that, and then I'll just step it up to higher and higher grit, and eventually have a nice smooth polished finish. And here we go with the 120 grit. I do realize that the sanding discs are larger than my sander, but it's the only size of stick-on disc that they had, so I have to make do. Well, I've been sanding on this edge with the 120 grit sandpaper for probably about 20 minutes now, and I've used up maybe 7 of these pads, and I think I'm ready to move up to the next finer grit of sandpaper. You can tell that the color is starting to come through on this granite. However, there's still no shine. That will come later. The idea behind using progressively finer and finer grits of sandpaper is that each subsequent finer grit removes the scratches that were left behind by the previous sandpaper. So I think I've got this one ready to go, so we'll tackle that next. So this is 220 grit sandpaper. And here's what it looks like after working on it for about 10 minutes with the 220 grit paper. Next, I'm going to use some water and wet sand the edge with some 600 grit paper. I've been sanding this for a little while now with the 600 grit paper, and I'm starting to see just a little hint of a shine starting to peek through there, which is encouraging. So I think the next step is to use this 1200 grit paper and wet sand the edge with that a little bit, and then finally I'll hit it with the 2000 to give it a nice polished look. Now I'm moving from the 1200 to the 2000 grit, and this should finish it up. And that should do it. I've only used about a third of a sheet of this 2000 grit sandpaper, but I think it's ready. Next, I'll just take off this tape. And give it a good wipe down. Not bad. Next, we'll see how it looks under the harsh scrutiny of fluorescent kitchen lights. And I think it passes the test. So here's a before and after. Not bad for an amateur with some sandpaper. So the next thing I need to do on this piece is glue another piece of granite underneath here so that it looks like this side right here, which is actually just two pieces glued together. What I'll do is I'll use one of my scrap pieces that still has this end piece on here and cut it off with my saw right along the line, and then glue it up under here and finish it up. My donor piece for finishing up this edge is the end of this countertop that I cut off earlier, right here. My idea is to use the saw and cut right along this seam right here, separating these two pieces, and then gluing this piece underneath here to finish up this edge. When I cut this piece, this line will probably be very difficult to see. So to help me keep track of it, I'm going to put down some masking tape right down here on the seam. That way I'll have a nice straight line to follow. Time to give it a try. And here's the finished piece. It would have been nice if I could have gotten that cut a little bit straighter, but I'm going to use it as is. I'm just going to use some construction adhesive that's suitable for stone and glue this up under here and secure it temporarily with a couple of clamps. And here's what it looks like with the clamps in place. I'm happy with my polishing job, but the seam has a little bit to be desired. It's not the cleanest joint because I had to just freehand this cut, but it'll have to suffice. So what I'm going to do now is let this dry overnight, and I think the next thing to do is start working on the backsplashes. Thanks for watching.